Every year, hundreds of college football players, top prospects, enter their names into the NFL draft, hoping to hear their name called to achieve their dream of playing in the NFL. Sometimes players just don't pan out, including the very top prospects, the biggest names, and they can just become forgotten. So today, we're gonna name the biggest bust in each draft from the last decade. 2013 was a loaded draft class in retrospect, however, at the time, it seems like teams didn't get it right. One of those teams being the Rams, who saw one of the most electric college wide receivers ever and knew they couldn't pass up on this seemingly generational talent. Passing up on DeAndre Hopkins, Robert Woods, and Keenan Allen, Tavon Austin was at the time the clear choice to be the first receiver off the board, and the Rams made that reality, drafting him at number 7 overall. Overall, the first round wasn't incredible outside of a few guys, those guys being Lane Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Xavier Rhodes, and Travis Frederick. Tavon Austin had arguably the best college highlight tape we have ever seen, so it's really hard to blame the Rams for selecting him. Tavon had a total of 12 receiving touchdowns during his time with the Rams and really mainly only played on special teams, so drafting a special teams player top 10 overall is just not worth it. During his rookie season, he only started 3 games as a wide receiver, and he had multiple seasons where he wouldn't catch any touchdowns and only had 1 season over 500 receiving yards. The Rams wouldn't bring him back after his rookie contract was up, and Tavon would bounce around, going from Dallas to Green Bay to Jacksonville over the next 4 seasons, and he's currently not even in the league. 2014's draft class is one of the best classes of all time, including names like Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, etc. But Blake Bortles was drafted 3rd overall by the Jaguars and was clearly a bust and probably the biggest bust of the draft, but I want to go over number 1 overall pick Jadeveon Clowney. So Blake Bortles is an honorable mention, and also Johnny Manziel is, but he was drafted outside of the top 20. Some people don't even consider Clowney a bust, however, he only spent 5 seasons with Houston, and only in 3 of those seasons he played double-digit games. Clowney started in 11 games over his first 2 seasons, and he really didn't do anything at all, only having 4.5 sacks. But Clowney would start to turn his career around and went to 3 straight Pro Bowls with Houston, but I honestly think he was a bit overrated in these seasons. So in his first 2 years, he hardly played, and then following that, he did have 3 good seasons, but he wouldn't return past his rookie contract with Houston. Obviously, Blake Bortles was the bigger bust, but Clowney was drafted higher overall and didn't get a contract extension, so it's not like the Texans really hit on their draft pick either. In 2015, Jameis Winston was a massive prospect coming out of college, where he won the Heisman Trophy and led Florida State to a national championship in 2013. And leading up to the draft, many people didn't know whether Marcus Mariota or Jameis Winston would be taken with the 1st overall draft pick held by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but it would ultimately end up being Winston taken by the Bucs. And this draft class was just horrible at the quarterback position. Neither Mariota or Winston re-signed with the teams that drafted them, and there wasn't a single quarterback in this draft class who panned out. Winston and Mariota would face off against each other in their NFL debuts, and this really should have been a thriller because it was the number 1 overall pick facing off against the number 2 overall pick, basically a battle to see who should have been picked 1st overall. But instead, the Titans would blow Jameis Winston and the Buccaneers out, and Winston's first career pass was basically foreshadowing his future. He threw a pick 6 on his first career throw. I could not imagine a more Jameis Winston scenario. Winston would struggle with turnover problems throughout his entire career. He was one of the riskiest quarterbacks in the NFL, basically a terrible version of Brett Favre. He tried to do too much on every throw, but this kind of made him one of the most entertaining QBs to watch, even though he wasn't great. He could throw for 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, but then he would also have 4 interceptions in the game, keeping both teams involved. And pairing with Bruce Arians made his play style get extreme in 2019, where he would throw for 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 30 interceptions. And ironic enough, his last pass with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would be an overtime pick 6 to lose the game against Atlanta on the first play of overtime. Overall, this quarterback class was weak. I'm going with Jameis Winston as the biggest bust, but Mariota is an honorable mention. 2016's first round draft class had a ton of talent, including Jalen Ramsey, Ezekiel Elliott, and Joey Bosa. My honorable mentions here are Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, and Corey Coleman, but Goff and Wentz both made it to Super Bowls. And in Wentz's case, even though he didn't play in the Super Bowl and he was injured for it, won a Super Bowl. But let's get into our biggest bust of the draft. Jalen Ramsey and Eli Apple were the first 2 corners drafted. Other corners on the board were guys like James Bradbury, Xavier Howard, and Kendall Fuller. But with the 11th overall pick in the draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would instead choose Vernon Hargreaves III. If you guys don't even know who he is, I do not blame you at all. The most popular play of his career is probably in the Super Bowl with the Bengals when he was injured and got a penalty for celebrating on the field field with Cincinnati while not even being suited up.
Non-uniform player. There he was. He comes off the bench, inactive. He may be inactive for a while after this scene.
Yeah. I mean, you
don't do that.
That's awful.
Hargreaves played only 3 full seasons with Tampa and totaled for 2 interceptions and ended up getting traded in the middle of the 2019 season. And after the Buccaneers traded him to Houston, their defense improved significantly. The secondary kind of started to ball right when he left. As a Bucs fan, this pick was just disappointing. But 2017 might be the most iconic draft blunder in NFL history. I'm pretty sure you guys all know what I'm talking about. The Chicago Bears traded up in the draft to select Mitch Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes. I am not sure if the Bears will ever live this mistake down. Patrick Mahomes is on GOAT level career trajectory. He's won 2 Super Bowls, he has 2 MVPs, and he has 2 Super Bowl MVPs. Meanwhile, Mitch Trubisky is a backup QB, not even on the Bears anymore. But hey, Patrick Mahomes doesn't have a single MVP. Trubisky did have 1 good season where he made the Pro Bowl and led the Bears to the playoffs, but not only did the Bears miss out on Mahomes, they also drafted Trubisky over Deshaun Watson. I'm honestly convinced the Bears have a QB curse where they're just not allowed to draft a good one or even have a good one. They've never had a 4,000-yard passer, and even in '85 when they won the Super Bowl, it was the legendary defense that carried them. But I'm not gonna lie, Justin Fields is looking pretty nice. He might be the one to break this curse.
There were 9 mistakes made ahead of me, and I will make sure over the next decade or so that they will know that they made a mistake.
It's safe to say there were no mistakes made ahead of Josh Rosen. As a matter of fact, he was easily the worst quarterback drafted in the first round, and every player ahead of him was easily better, especially Josh Allen. You can definitely say Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold were busts too, but at least they can provide as a serviceable backup and maybe even a decent bridge quarterback. Meanwhile, Josh Rosen is bouncing around practice squads and was so bad that the Cardinals drafted a QB with the #1 overall pick the very next season. Rosen has only played 3 NFL seasons on an active roster, and he had a horrendous 12 to 21 touchdown interception ratio. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns every single season that he's been in the NFL, and while the Cardinals would get Kyler Murray in the next draft, they missed out on Lamar Jackson, who would go on to win an MVP in his 2nd year in the league. 2019 was actually a very strong draft class, and in the top 10 picks, pretty much every single one panned out, I would say, except for Clelin Ferrell. Daniel Jones isn't great in my opinion. I think he's overrated, but he was the best quarterback available at the position he was drafted. The Raiders took Clelin Ferrell 4th overall over other defensive ends like Brian Burns and Montez Sweat. And this isn't really surprising because the Raiders are known for reaching on draft picks, and Clelin Ferrell is currently still a Raider, but he is nothing more than a rotational piece. In 2021, he didn't start a single game for Las Vegas, and in 2022, he only started in 4 games. The Raiders had another pick also in the first round of the draft where they would take Jonathan Abram, 27th overall, which to the surprise of absolutely nobody, they also missed on. 2020 was another draft class that has been incredibly good. There was a popular mistake in this draft. The Philadelphia Eagles made a popular mistake in this draft by taking Jalen Reagor 1 pick ahead of Justin Jefferson. In hindsight, this pick was bad, and in the moment, this pick was also looked at as a bad pick, so I'm not really sure what Philly was thinking right there. And also, Henry Ruggs was, for certain reasons, a bad pick, but let's not get into that. I think Jeff Okudah was the biggest bust in this draft class, being selected by the Detroit Lions #3 overall. They took Okudah over guys like Trayvon Diggs, AJ Terrell, and Jalen Johnson. Jeff Okudah isn't even with the Detroit Lions anymore. He didn't finish out his rookie contract with the Lions, which obviously usually means a player's a bust. He did show some flashes in 2022, but he wasn't consistent enough. The Lions traded Okudah to the Falcons during this offseason for a couple late round picks, and maybe Jeff will have a chance to revive his career with Atlanta, but for now, he's a bust. The 2021 draft class is only 2 years removed, so it might be a little bit too early to necessarily consider players busts, but I think it's safe to say Zach Wilson is just not him. Wilson has been in some controversy off the field, giving him one of the best nicknames in the NFL, Zach Milfson, but on the field, he is the best at nothing. He got benched by the Jets multiple times and really hasn't shown any upside. Zach was drafted 2nd overall over Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones. Lance and Mac aren't necessarily great, but I'd still take both of them over Zach Wilson, but at least the Jets ended up trading for Aaron Rodgers this offseason. Zach Wilson was asked what he would do if the Jets brought in a veteran QB, where he would say,
Yeah, I'm gonna make that dude's life hell in practice every day.
So it's gonna be interesting in the Jets locker room, and I wouldn't be surprised if Zach Wilson gets traded anytime soon. It is definitely too early to consider anybody from the 2022 draft class a bust, but after just one season, Trayvon Walker has to be the least talked about first overall pick ever. I mean, he was nearly irrelevant during the NFL season, and he really didn't do much. He wasn't necessarily a bad player at all, but he also wasn't anything special. He was drafted ahead of Aiden Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau, which I think was a bad decision. I was even surprised in the moment when the Jaguars took Trayvon Walker. I thought both Thibodeau and Hutch were better than Walker entering the draft. Hutchinson was a runner-up for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and he's looking to be a very promising young player. Walker definitely does have time to become a great player, and the Jaguars are a young team on the rise, so it will be interesting to see how they can develop him, but as for now, I'd say he's a player to watch who might become a bust. Let me know if I missed any players on this list, but that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like and sub, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.